Welcome back after our journey through the book of Genesis. And so as I was looking at kind of what to do next for many messages, I thought, well, the continuity really makes sense to continue into the book of Exodus because it continues the story with the future generations. Actually, when you look in the Hebrew, the first word in the original language of the book of Exodus is the word and. So it's this continuity continuing. It's kind of like Joseph died and it just continues right into Exodus as Moses was inspired by God and he wrote down the history of the Israelite people through the book of Deuteronomy, from Genesis through Deuteronomy is all the books of Moses. And so he continues here. He says, and I'll add the and because it's fun. And these are the names of the sons of Israel, that is Jacob, who moved to Egypt with their father, each with his family. Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Benjamin, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. In all, Jacob had 70 descendants in Egypt, including Joseph, who was already there. In time, Joseph and all of his brothers died, ending that entire generation. So the first verse of the book of Exodus reaches back about 430 years. The story of Exodus begins where the story of Genesis ends, with these brothers in Egypt. They're taken out of the promised land and put here. Now remember, and we talked about this in some of the earlier mini messages in Genesis when they went to Egypt. The Egyptians would not have wanted to have anything to do with the the Israelites, as far as intermingling with them. There would have been no intermarriage. There would have been none of that, right? So the nation of Israel would have been able to stay uncorrupted as far as being led astray in the worship of some of the Egyptian gods. They very likely eventually would have lost their uniqueness and lost their identity if they'd have stayed in the land of Canaan, because they would have wound up, as generations went, intermarrying with the different people in the land and just would have wound up kind of blending in and mixing in. But in Egypt, that really wasn't possible. They were in the land of Goshen. The Egyptians didn't want anything to do with them, to the point that the Egyptians would eat a meal with him. They wouldn't eat a meal with Joseph. Joseph ate by himself because they would not want to even sit down and eat a meal with Joseph, even in his place of power. So there was this very racial and ethnic separation that was happening here. And this generation all dies. Joseph, his brothers, they die. And it continues in verse 7. Let me just read verse 7 for you. It says, but their descendants, the Israelites, had many children and grandchildren. In fact, they multiplied so greatly that they became extremely powerful and filled the land. So they are in Goshen, the land of Goshen. And they had possessions there. And the words from the original language were that they were fruitful. They swarmed. They became numerous. So they're growing in number. And this is very important, right? This is all part of God's plan, that when they get to the level of population, that they can then move out of the land of Egypt and go back to the land of Canaan and actually be able to take possession of it, just like God had told them all the way back to the first generation, the generation of Abraham. And they're going to run into some problems with this. And we'll talk about the Egyptians' role in some of this tomorrow.